Hello, this is Chris Wilhelm, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Friday, August 14th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Our first article today, Homeland Security paid $464 million for airplanes, then it parked them. The agency used a no-bid contract to buy 10 used jets, saying they were urgently needed for deportation flights, but the fleet has largely sat idle for months. By David A. Fahrenthold, Andrea Fuller, Julie Tate, Nicholas Neamas, and Ahmed Ali-Aziz. Starting last fall, the Department of Homeland Security spent $464 million on a no-bid contract to buy 10 used airplanes from a firm in Northern Virginia. That was an enormous price tag, but the department said it had no time to consider other offers. The planes were needed urgently for deportation flights. Since then, the department has barely used this new fleet for deportations or anything else. 3 of the aircraft are luxury business jets. Just months after acquiring them, the department sought to loan or lease 2 to other agencies, including one for the use of the FBI Director Kash Patel, according to a letter to the department sent Wednesday by top Democrats on the Senate Appropriations Committee. The other 7 are older Boeing 737 passenger jets, which the government has left parked at an airport in Lake Charles, Louisiana for months at a time, as reported earlier by CNN. An internal government document obtained by the New York Times says the agency did not have the staff necessary to operate them. The acquisitions were part of a surge of rushed contracts handed out recently by the Homeland Security Department, which has repeatedly used the need for urgency to bypass regular contracting procedures. The idled planes highlight the risks of that approach. The agency rushed headlong to spend nearly $500 million, only to end up with planes that did not fly. The contract also illuminated a broader trend within the second Trump administration: no-bid contracts awarded to people with connections to Mr. Trump or his cabinet secretaries. The company that received this contract, Daedalus Aviation Corporation, is led by a chairman who has donated to a political committee supporting the previous Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem. The department's Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency has long outsourced its deportation flights by chartering planes from private companies. It also uses military and Coast Guard aircraft. Because of that, former immigration officials said there seemed to be little need for the department to take on the expense of buying and maintaining a significant number of its own aircraft. In a written statement, the Homeland Security Department sought to shift responsibility for the contract to Ms. Noem. President Trump fired her in March and appointed Markwayne Mullin, a Republican senator from Oklahoma, as secretary. The contract for Daedalus was made and approved by department leadership before Secretary Mullin was sworn in, the department said in a statement. The agency said it reserves the right to adjust course in an environment with evolving requirements and demands. A spokeswoman for Ms. Noem sought to place the responsibility on Mr. Mullin instead, saying the purchase was finalized under his leadership. Contracting records show that the size of the contract increased by $303 million on the day that Mr. Mullin was sworn in as secretary. The agency said that the idle 737 passenger jets had been undergoing maintenance checks and that there were plans for 2 of them to begin deportation flights later this month. The situation with the planes was reminiscent of the department's about-face on a plan to acquire warehouses to hold detainees. The department spent heavily on those when Ms. Noem was secretary, but reversed itself just months later under Mr. Mullin. The department is now giving away or selling 7 warehouses that it bought for more than $700 million. A letter sent to the department Wednesday by Senators Patty Murray of Washington and Christopher Murphy of Connecticut, both Democrats who sit on the Senate Appropriations Committee, said Homeland Security officials had already conceded to the committee that most of the planes would not be used for deportations. The senators asked for details about the purchase price of each plane and how they would be used. Federal law generally requires government agencies to seek competing bids before awarding a contract to ensure taxpayers get the best deal. But the department sidestepped that requirement for the planes contract by invoking an exemption for cases of unusual and compelling urgency. The department has invoked the urgency exemption to justify more than $29 billion in spending across about 500 contracts awarded during Mr. Trump's second term, according to an analysis of federal data by the Times. Much of that total came from border wall spending. The exemption accounts for nearly two-thirds of the $34 billion that the department has spent on contracts signed in 2026. That is up sharply from past years. In 2025, the figure was about one quarter. In 2024, it was less than 1%. No other major agency has used the exemption for urgency as frequently as the Department of Homeland Security, even in an administration that has turned to no-bid contracts repeatedly for event planning, fountain repair, and the troubled makeover of the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool. The contract for the planes was first awarded in late November. At the time, the government was already paying other contractors hundreds of millions to operate a network of charter flights called ICE Air. The immigration agency has chartered about 25,800 flights in Mr. Trump's second term, shuttling immigrants between detention centers domestically and deporting them abroad, mainly to Latin America and the Caribbean, according to the ICE Flight Monitor tracking project at Human Rights First, a nonprofit advocacy group. The department sometimes has 25 or more planes in the air in a day, according to the nonprofit's tracking. But at the time, the Homeland Security Department said it still needed its own planes. Daedalus, the Arlington, Virginia-based company that the government hired to find the planes, had not previously held a federal contract. However, a company spokesman said it had worked as a subcontractor to other companies evacuating Afghans who had done work for the U.S. government. Daedalus's chairman is William Walters, a doctor who until 2021 led a State Department office that evacuated Americans from outbreaks of Ebola, COVID-19, and other crises. In 2024, after leaving government, Mr. Walters donated $10,000 to a political committee connected to Ms. Noem, then the governor of South Dakota. Last year, with Ms. Noem in charge, the agency gave a separate company run by Mr. Walters a contract worth nearly $700 million to encourage immigrants to leave the U.S. voluntarily. A Daedalus spokesman said that Mr. Walters was unaware that the political committee was tied to Ms. Noem. Daedalus declined to say how much each of the 10 planes had cost or what its profit margin was for acting essentially as a broker. It provided a written statement that it was proud to provide the best value to the American taxpayer. Senate Democrats said they were told by Homeland Security staff that 4 of the 737s were no longer expected to fly detained immigrants. The senators said the department said it would use them to fly members of Congress on overseas trips, a job now handled by commercial carriers or military aircraft. For the long term, the agency said it needed a contractor to provide crews and mechanics to operate its new fleet. A recent solicitation said that contract would start next summer. Concerns grow over conditions on Navy carrier. The USS Abraham Lincoln has been deployed for nearly 9 months. Members of Congress are worried about the crew's well-being. By John Ismay, Helena Cooper, and Eric Schmidt. Democratic senators have begun raising questions about the extended deployment of the USS Abraham Lincoln, amid reports about poor living conditions and a lack of downtime for the crew after more than 8.5 months at sea. The Lincoln, a San Diego-based aircraft carrier with a crew of about 5,000 sailors, is supporting U.S. operations in the Middle East against Iran. In a letter to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Hung Cao, the acting Navy Secretary, Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat of Connecticut, described a list of reported problems on the ship. There have been widespread reports of shortages of basic supplies, water contamination, plumbing issues, deteriorating mental health, deck safety concerns, and disruptions in the mail system, which have caused many care packages en route to the ship to be lost in transit for months. He wrote about the problems, many of which were reported earlier by Navy Times and Stars and Stripes. Mr. Blumenthal added that the Trump administration had kept aircraft carriers at sea far longer than usual during its pressure campaign against Venezuela and its war with Iran. Senator Ruben Gallego, Democrat of Arizona, said in a social media post on Wednesday that he was requesting an oversight visit to the Lincoln for a bipartisan delegation of lawmakers. Unlike Donald Trump, I've seen active duty, said Mr. Gallego, who served in combat as a Marine. The way he's treating our service members as he carries out this illegal war is not just disgusting, it's dangerous. The Navy is sending the aircraft carrier George Washington to the Middle East to relieve the Lincoln, according to a U.S. official who spoke on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to speak publicly about ship schedules. Mr. Hegseth pushed back on the reports of poor conditions aboard the Lincoln. We make sure that every ship, every crew, every captain has everything we can provide them at every single moment, he told reporters during a visit to Panama on Thursday. Some deployments are longer than others, and I have more respect and gratitude for those sailors than anybody. What they do in those high seas, in those austere conditions, with less port calls, it's incredible. A second carrier, the USS George H.W. Bush, deployed on March 31st and is already operating in the Middle East. The Navy's newest carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, was deployed for 326 days before it returned home in May, breaking the record for the longest carrier deployment since the Vietnam War. The Ford deployed from Norfolk, Virginia on June 24, 2025, and was operating in the Mediterranean when it was redirected to the Caribbean in October as part of the force that captured President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela. In February, the ship was sent to the Middle East as part of a buildup of U.S. military forces in the region that launched the war against Iran late last month. During its deployment, the ship suffered a fire, food and mail shortages, along with mechanical problems. The longer warship deployments are, the more they wear on people and equipment alike. When in constant operation, gear often begins to break or become inoperable if replacement parts are not readily available, and the non-stop cycle can take a toll on morale. Keeping warships out for extended periods often creates other issues, such as upending plans that keep ships in certain parts of the globe for strategic reasons, along with interrupting shipyard maintenance schedules that are developed years in advance. The Navy has a lot of flexibility to react to contingency operations, but as those deployments get extended and demand more underway time outside of normal schedules, readiness and maintenance suffer, Mike Franken, a retired Navy Vice Admiral, said in an interview. We just don't have the ability to recover from that quickly. It will take years. The Lincoln itself had to fend off attacks from Iran during the early phase of the war. Iran shot hundreds and hundreds of missiles and one-way attack drones at our aircraft carrier, Mr. Hegseth told reporters at the Pentagon on April 8th. Every single one of those shots easily shot down miles and miles away from the Abe Lincoln. The Lincoln has also helped enforce the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports, which initially ran from April 13th until a ceasefire agreement was announced in mid-June and then resumed on July 15th. During the first blockade, U.S. Central Command, which directs military operations across the Middle East, said its forces disabled 9 non-compliant vessels through gunfire and missile attacks and had redirected 135 ships that ultimately complied with the blockade order. In the second blockade, there appeared to have been fewer U.S. attacks on merchant ships. In its most recent update on August 9th, Central Command said it had redirected 55 commercial vessels, disabled 2, and boarded 2 to ensure compliance since the blockade was reinstated. When the Lincoln's relief will arrive is unclear, but the George Washington recently passed through the Strait of Malacca. a major transit route through the Pacific Ocean in Indonesian waters, heading west, according to a second U.S. official who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss warship movements. With the Navy's limited number of aircraft carriers being routinely pushed months beyond their scheduled deployments, Admiral Franken said, it will begin to limit their availability for combat operations in the future. I guarantee you that the first 2 years of the Trump administration will definitely affect the next 2 years of the Trump administration, he said. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. New Yorkers who lost insurance after Trump cuts face hard choices. New York State's generous health plan for working-class people was hit hard by federal funding cuts. More than 400,000 people are now looking for new coverage or living without it. By Emma G. Fitzsimmons. When Muriel Sathu's family lost their health insurance last month, she signed up her 3 children for a new plan, but she and her husband could not afford coverage for themselves. Ms. Sathu, a personal care assistant who lives in Plattsburgh, New York, was among more than 400,000 people in the state who lost their low-cost health care coverage, known as the Essential Plan, after federal funding cuts under President Trump. I was disappointed and also scared, she said. You never know. You could get sick any time. Ms. Sathu said that she and her husband, a machine operator in a warehouse, could not pay hundreds of dollars per month for insurance. Their previous plan had no monthly premium. She plans to work more hours and seek coverage through her employer. New York's Essential Plan, an unusual state program that is almost entirely federally subsidized, was a lifeline for people who earn too much to qualify for Medicaid but struggled to pay for private insurance. Established in 2015 under the Affordable Care Act, the plan also became popular with immigrants ineligible for Medicaid and drove down the number of people in New York without health insurance to below 5%. Now, health experts are worried that number will rise and that more people will lose access to care. And many New Yorkers are now paying more for insurance at a time when families are already struggling to afford housing and groceries. The plan had become a spigot of billions of federal health care dollars, more than were routed to other states. When Mr. Trump's domestic policy law was approved last year, it restricted which non-citizens were eligible, reducing the flow of funding. The state then limited eligibility. The earnings threshold for a family of 4 used to be $82,500. Now it is $66,000. Health officials and community groups are rushing to help people find new insurance. Nearly 450,000 people lost coverage on July 1st, and about 242,000 have since joined new plans, state officials said. New Yorkers have until the end of August to sign up for coverage through the state's marketplace. Elizabeth Benjamin, a vice president at the Community Service Society, an anti-poverty nonprofit that helps people access health care, said that many of those who lost coverage were freelancers and hourly workers. Our call volume has doubled, she said. People are confused and upset. They're going without insurance. The deep cuts to the Essential Plan come as congressional Republicans have reduced federal subsidies for people on ACA plans, and enrollment has dropped. More New Yorkers are expected to lose their insurance in January when new Medicaid rules, including work requirements, take effect. State officials have warned that more than 1 million people in New York could lose Medicaid coverage in the coming years. Helen Arteaga, the deputy mayor of Health and Human Services in New York City, said in an interview that she had met with health executives and community groups about how to support people who are losing coverage. This is not a one-time problem, she said. We're going to need solutions to support New Yorkers for the next 2 to 3 years. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York met with Ms. Arteaga at City Hall last week and posted a video on social media expressing concern about the health care cuts. Democrats have sought to highlight the issue ahead of the midterm elections in November. Republicans, like Representative Mike Lawler, have defended the cuts, arguing that they reined in wasteful programs. A spokesman for Mr. Lawler, who is facing a competitive race in the Hudson Valley, said that Governor Kathy Hochul built a health care program no other state in the country runs, spent New York into a corner, and now wants to blame Washington when the bill comes due. Bill Hammond, a healthcare policy analyst at the Empire Center for Public Policy, a fiscally conservative think tank, said the essential plan was unsustainable under the previous rules. Those losing coverage have incomes between 200% and 250% of the federal poverty level, or between $31,900 and $39,900 for a single adult. I think it's reasonable to ask people in that range to pay more, he said. Ms. Hochul, a Democrat, has said that she fought to preserve the plan for more than 1 million people with lower incomes. Nicolette Simmons, a spokeswoman for the governor, said that the state was helping people find new coverage. Make no mistake, the devastation families are experiencing is a direct result of Republicans' callous vote, Ms. Simmons said, and the governor will continue to do everything in her power to ensure New Yorkers are protected. Some state lawmakers had called on Ms. Hochul to provide state funding to prevent people from losing coverage, but it was not included in the state budget deal earlier this year. Keeping those 450,000 people on the plan could have cost more than $2 billion annually, experts said. Mary Lemming, a part-time teacher and editor who lives in Stony Brook on Long Island, lost her coverage last month and signed up for a plan on the state marketplace that costs more than $800 per month. She puts it on her credit card. That is not in my budget, she said. The new plan is worse than her old one, she said, and her dermatologist does not accept it. I'll have to pay out of pocket, she said. New York City's public hospital system could be further strained by an influx of uninsured people. Dr. Jonathan Jimenez is a family physician and executive director of NYC Care, a program overseen by the hospital system that provides low-cost and free services to those without insurance. He said he was worried about those who will delay preventive care and end up in hospitals. That's where you see the impact of not having access, he said. People in their 40s or 50s showing up with a massive stroke and they had hypertension, but they weren't connected to care. Those are all preventable deaths. Judge dismisses federal government's anti-Semitism case against Harvard. The government argued the university had not done enough to combat anti-Semitism during campus protests. A judge called the incidents isolated and episodic. By Mark Arsenal. A federal judge in Boston on Thursday dismissed the Trump administration's anti-Semitism lawsuit against Harvard University, dealing a blow to the government's efforts to force the school to make a deal. The lawsuit was part of a broader pressure campaign to force the university to comply with a variety of government demands on issues that include its handling of anti-Semitism and race in admissions. Judge Richard G. Stearns of the U.S. District Court in Massachusetts granted Harvard's motion to throw out the case, saying that the anti-Semitic incidents cited in the administration's March lawsuit were too isolated and episodic to show that Harvard is breaking the law. In its lawsuit filed in the spring, the Trump administration had accused the university of turning a blind eye to anti-Semitism and discrimination against Jews and Israelis. The administration said that Harvard had allowed anti-Israel protesters to violate school rules with impunity after the war in Gaza began in 2023. A spokesman for Harvard declined to comment. The Trump administration did not immediately respond to requests for comment on Thursday. The administration accused Harvard of violating Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which bans discrimination in programs that receive federal money. The lawsuit stated that Jewish and Israeli students had been subject to hostility, harassment, and intimidation during a time when students were holding pro-Palestinian protests. It cited a conflict from 2023 in which a Jewish student trying to film a die-in at Harvard was surrounded by protesters who tried to block his camera with scarves and jostled him. The lawsuit repeatedly cited the report of a task force Harvard created to investigate episodes of anti-Semitism. The university argued in a June brief that Harvard for several years had engaged in sustained, institution-wide efforts to identify and address anti-Semitism on campus. Judge Stearns sided with Harvard in his ruling, noting that the Trump administration's lawsuit focused mostly on incidents during the 2023-24 school year. The anti-Semitic incidents cited by the administration do not support a plausible inference that any institutionalized noncompliance with Title VI persists at Harvard to this day, the judge wrote. The Trump administration, in its lawsuit, sought the right to deny federal grants to Harvard, but the judge said the law was designed to force a school into compliance, not to penalize it. Carl Tobias, a professor at the University of Richmond School of Law, said the ruling for Harvard was rather narrow and may be appealed. He expects the Trump administration will continue to pressure colleges and universities through the courts. The administration and the Justice Department seem to have focused on Harvard as the major private school target, but a number of other private and some public schools have been and seem to remain in DOJ's crosshairs, he said. But Samuel Bagenstoss, a University of Michigan law professor, said the ruling eliminates any realistic chance that the Trump administration can use a Title VI investigation to coerce Harvard. The government has proved very creative in devising ways to pressure the university, he said, though at some point the folks in the Trump administration will surely realize that they look as ridiculous as Wile E. Coyote trying to catch the Roadrunner. The Brandeis Center, a Jewish civil rights group, argued that the judge's reasoning could create a legal standard that would make it harder for the government to win civil rights cases in the future. Instead of just showing that an institution had refused to fix a violation, the government would have to also show subsequent violations, the group's chairman, Kenneth L. Marcus, said in a statement. That would set a much higher bar for cases, said Mr. Marcus, who was an education official in the first Trump administration. Other Trump-Harvard litigation continues to grind through federal courts, mostly out of sight, as the two sides build lengthy records of briefs and legal arguments. Another Boston federal judge ruled in September that the Trump administration had improperly frozen grants to Harvard. The administration said it had done so in response to the school's tolerating harassment of Jewish students. The Trump administration appealed, and the case is progressing. In a legal filing this spring, the president's lawyers sought to show Harvard's long, sordid history of anti-Semitism by citing Judah Monis, a Jew hired as a professor of Hebrew some 300 years ago, who had to convert to Christianity to join the faculty. That injustice was in 1722, decades before the Declaration of Independence. In July, more than 10,000 alumni, from members of the class of 1950 to the class of 2026, filed a brief in support of Harvard, arguing that universities like Harvard can only manifest their mission, values, and foundational principles if they can operate with academic freedom. Harvard's battles with the Trump administration have broader implications for the federal government's relationship with higher education. Many universities rely heavily on federal financial support to conduct research on cancer treatments, agriculture, and other topics. In late July, more than 36 schools filed a legal brief supporting Harvard, saying that cutting research money to universities jeopardizes American innovation and economic growth by severely limiting their ability to play their vital, long-standing roles in expanding scientific knowledge. Harvard and the government are also in a legal battle after the Trump administration tried to stop Harvard from hosting international students. A federal judge ruled in Harvard's favor in June 2025. The government is appealing. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Europe is once again in the grip of a heat wave. The latest round of extreme temperatures, the fifth since May, is disrupting daily life and testing the region's resilience. By Nazanin Ghaffar and Lindsay Chutel. Large swaths of Europe are in the grip of another intense heat wave this week, the fifth spell of broiling conditions to hit the continent since May. Forecasters warned that the persistence of extreme temperatures and dry conditions was dangerously increasing the risk of wildfires. The scorching weather, some of which has been tied to climate change, has upended summertime in Europe, turning a beloved vacation season into a string of heat warnings, fire-related evacuations, stringent water restrictions, and government crisis meetings. Some wonder whether the continent's summers will ever be the same again. The intense heat is being driven by a stubborn high-pressure system, also known as a heat dome, parked over the heart of the continent. Temperatures this week have already soared to 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit, or higher across western parts of Europe. The heat is set to expand in the coming days to Central Europe, including the Czech Republic, Germany, and Poland. The European Forest Fire Information System has said that a large area of Central and Eastern Europe, stretching from the Alpine region through Poland and into the Balkans, as well as southern Britain, Ireland, northern France, and southern Sweden, will remain under very extreme fire conditions through at least next week. Here's what to know. How hot will it get? High-level heat warnings were in place across parts of Western, Central, and Southern Europe on Thursday, with the most severe alerts in Croatia, Italy, and Switzerland. In Spain, AEMET, the country's weather service, said temperatures would broadly remain above 35 degrees Celsius, 95 degrees Fahrenheit, on Thursday and Friday and would climb as high as 42 degrees in parts of the south and northeast. Météo France, France's weather service, said the heat was expected to peak in the west of the country on Thursday, with temperatures up to 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit, expected before shifting east on Friday. Cooler air and thunderstorms were forecast to move in from the west by the weekend. Parts of central, northern, and southern France were under high-level wildfire warnings for Thursday and Friday. Britain has faced an exceptional run of high temperatures. The Met Office, the country's weather service, warned that temperatures on Thursday could reach 38 Celsius, around 100 degrees Fahrenheit, especially in parts of the Midlands and Western England. It said the summer would likely be Britain's hottest on record in terms of mean temperature, surpassing a record set just last year. Italy has been broiling since last week, when the health authorities placed all 27 cities monitored by its heat surveillance system under red alert. On Thursday, the Italian Air Force Meteorological Service said that temperatures could reach 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit, in parts of Sardinia, Campania, Basilicata, Calabria, Umbria, and Sicily. In Germany, the Deutscher Wetterdienst, the country's weather service, said to expect temperatures up to 38 degrees Celsius, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, in the coming days, especially in the west and southwest on Friday and Saturday. The Czech Republic's weather service said temperatures would rise through the weekend, possibly reaching 35 degrees Celsius, 95 Fahrenheit. In Poland, the Institute of Meteorology and Water Management said temperatures could reach 37 degrees Celsius, nearly 99 degrees Fahrenheit, in some western, central, and northern regions on Sunday. What is the impact? Governments have warned of mounting costs. Monique Barbude, France's minister in charge of environmental affairs, said on Wednesday that this summer's heat waves could cost the country 10 to 15 billion euros. Ms. Barbude said at a crisis meeting that the number was a rough estimate and should be taken with a great deal of caution. But she said the costs would undoubtedly be higher than in 2022, when drought alone cost France 5.6 billion euros, before factoring in other effects like lower tourism. Infrastructure is under stress. Romania's government said it would begin the controlled shutdown of one of 2 units at the Cernavodă nuclear power plant in the country's southeast due to low water levels on the Danube River, which is used to keep the plant cool. Radu Muruta, Romania's acting defense minister, said on Wednesday that technicians were monitoring water levels to keep the other unit online for as long as possible. Some workers say conditions are unbearable. Britain's largest nurses' union, the Royal College of Nursing, said on Thursday that medical staff were facing impossible and inhumane conditions in hospitals without air conditioning or proper ventilation. The union said it had received reports of staff collapsing and of heat-related seizures. In France, firefighters called for protests in September after a meeting on Thursday with the government that they said failed to address demands for more resources. Winemakers are worried. Vineyards in some of France's wine-growing regions have rushed to harvest because of the heat, which can cause grapes to ripen early and change their sugar content. A harvest before August 15th is unprecedented, Roxanne Hardy, the head of a vineyard in the Colmar area of the Alsace region, told a local newspaper. In the champagne-making region of Chennai, vineyard owners said the dry conditions could also lead to a smaller yield. Europe is heating up fast. While the degree to which a single heat event is influenced by climate change requires specific attribution studies, scientists are certain that heat waves around the world are generally becoming hotter, more frequent, and longer lasting, and Europe is warming faster than any other continent. In 2025, almost the entire continent was hotter than normal. Researchers estimate that in recent years, Europe has seen tens of thousands of heat-related deaths annually. Many homes, schools, and businesses across Europe were built for an older, cooler climate. In Britain, many were even built to retain heat, making cooling off amid heat waves especially difficult. Air conditioning is not a quick fix. In France, installing such systems has become a political flashpoint, while in Britain, high energy prices deter many. How to cool off? Staying cool and hydrating often are the two most important things to do to avoid feeling sick and discomfort in extreme heat. Here are some other ways to keep cool. Block out the windows in your home, especially those that get afternoon sun, with a blanket or a darker sheet during the day to keep the heat out. At night, keep windows open and run fans to circulate the air. Spritz your skin with a mist of cool or room temperature water, or wipe your forehead with a cool cloth. Cold showers can also help you cool down. If you need to be outdoors, put ice cubes in your water bottle and drink cool liquids. If you plan to exercise, douse your head in cool water. Swimming is also a great way to exercise and keep cool. When exploring or sightseeing, seek out cooler attractions such as museums, cathedrals, or even subterranean exhibitions. Watch out for signs of heat stroke. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention lists some of them as dizziness, a rapid pulse, nausea, headache, and fainting, but symptoms can vary. Russian strikes on dozens of grain ships threaten global food supplies. The deadly strikes are part of a long-running maritime battle with Ukraine and echo battles over other key shipping routes around the world. By Mark Santora. As families strolled along a promenade in the Ukrainian port city of Odessa recently, a lone cargo ship sailed in the distance. Suddenly, a drone dropped out of the clear blue sky and slammed into the vessel, sending smoke billowing across the horizon. The attack, which I witnessed in late July, was part of a Russian campaign targeting cargo vessels that had halted nearly all shipping in and out of Odessa, Ukraine's most crucial link to the world economy. Coming at the start of the harvest season, the Russian campaign in Ukraine, which is a major producer of grains like wheat, corn, and barley, could throw global food supply chains into turmoil. In 2022, during the first months of the full-scale war, Russia established a blockade of Ukrainian ports, causing a spike in global food prices and placing an estimated 70 million people at increased risk of acute food insecurity. Russia is hunting these vessels, Dmytro Baranov, president of the Ukrainian Ports Association, said in an interview. It's a professional hunting for civilian vessels. The Russian strikes are the latest chapter in a long-running battle over the Black Sea and the adjacent Sea of Azov. New weapons that allow for precision targeting at greater distances have made slow-moving cargo vessels easy targets. In June and July, Russian forces attacked at least 50 cargo ships, according to Ukrainian officials, killing more than 30 civilians. Ukraine has also systematically targeted Russian-linked tankers and cargo vessels. Moscow's maritime campaign appears to be a response to Ukraine's decimation of the Russian fleet of River Sea oil tankers in the Sea of Azov, and to Kyiv's continued targeting of ships transporting Russian goods, which has left occupied Crimea isolated and starved for fuel. Ukraine's latest major assault took place before dawn on Wednesday, when the country's forces attacked the Russian port of Novorossiysk on the Black Sea with jet-powered drones, missiles, and unmanned naval systems, President Volodymyr Zelensky said. Air defense positions, piers, and seaports infrastructure were struck, he said. 3 people died, including an 8-year-old child, and about 60 residential buildings were damaged. Veniamin Kondratyev, the governor of the Krasnodar region, which includes Novorossiysk, said on social media. Andrei Kravchenko, the mayor of the city, which is a critical hub for grain exports, declared a state of emergency. He said the city's water supply had been suspended after 2 mains were damaged. The escalating battle between Russia and Ukraine is a flashpoint in a larger global phenomenon that threatens one of the foundational tenets of the international order, freedom of navigation. That maritime system, which underpins modern global commerce, is under strain as state and non-state actors increasingly use drones, anti-ship missiles, and mines to disrupt routes, particularly in places like the Red Sea and the Strait of Hormuz. The strait, a key conduit for oil and gas, has effectively been closed since the United States and Israel attacked Iran in February. At the port in Odessa and 2 others nearby, the Russian blockade could trap millions of tons of grain. The 3 ports account for about 60% of Ukraine's total monthly export revenue of $3.5 billion. Ukrainian Agri-Council, a trade group, has warned of a potential wave of bankruptcies and has pleaded for emergency loans and state guarantees. The situation has echoes of the 2022 Russian blockade on Ukrainian ports. In July that year, the United Nations and Turkey brokered the Black Sea Grain Initiative, which allowed shipping to resume. The deal fell apart a year later, but by that point, Ukraine had driven Russian warships out of the northwestern part of the Black Sea and was largely able to continue shipping. As Russia has stepped up strikes in recent weeks, among dozens of ships hit was a bulk carrier called the Golden Leo. Blesson Sebastian, a 28-year-old second officer on the Golden Leo, grew up in Chennai, India, dreaming of the sea, he said. He had been to Ukraine many times over the past 8 months, but when his vessel arrived last month, he said, the pace of Russian attacks was far more intense than anything he had experienced on previous trips. The crew avoided Odessa's main port, docking at nearby Chornomorsk. It offered no sanctuary. A neighboring ship was bombed by drones, killing an officer and a security guard, Mr. Sebastian said. The Golden Leo's crew slept in steel bunkers. On July 19th, the ship was fully loaded with grain and departed. Mr. Sebastian said he saw families enjoying a peaceful afternoon at the beach as the boat pulled away. He told nervous younger crew members that everything would be fine. At 4:30 p.m., the ship's Syrian captain went to his cabin to pray, while Mr. Sebastian sat on the bridge reading his Bible. Once the boat was 4 miles out of the port, Mr. Sebastian said, an air alarm wailed. Volodymyr Mikhailov, a Ukrainian who was on board to pilot the boat out of the harbor, advised leaving the bridge because Russian drones typically target the navigation deck, Mr. Sebastian said. As Mr. Mikhailov and Mr. Sebastian made their way down the stairs, a Russian missile slammed into the hull. It rained fire, Mr. Sebastian told me in an interview near the port. This is it, he recalled thinking, it's the end. Mr. Mikhailov was thrown into Mr. Sebastian and they both tumbled to the ground. Deafened by the blast, Mr. Sebastian shook Mr. Mikhailov, but he was unresponsive. He died in Mr. Sebastian's arms. Stumbling through shattered steel, Mr. Sebastian found the captain severely burned and the boatswain unconscious. Blinding smoke poured from the engine room. The few survivors scrambled aboard a small boat that had been intended to return Mr. Mikhailov to port after his piloting duties. As the survivors escaped, they watched the Golden Leo burn like a furnace, Mr. Sebastian said. 9 crew members and Mr. Mikhailov were killed in the strike. The boat sank a week later. Elizabeth Braw, an expert on maritime threats who works at the Atlantic Council, a think tank, said that Russia was waging a systematic and indiscriminate campaign against merchant vessels carrying agricultural goods and other non-military cargo in and out of Ukrainian ports. Such attacks violate treaties such as the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, she said. While the Russian-linked oil tankers and cargo vessels that Ukraine has targeted are technically civilian ships, maritime experts say, Kyiv attacks them because they are used to circumvent sanctions and export energy that funds the Kremlin's war effort. Western nations have at times intercepted such ships, part of Russia's so-called shadow fleet. On Wednesday, during a visit aboard a Russian warship in the Pacific, President Vladimir V. Putin called those efforts piracy and robbery and vowed to respond in kind. Russian operators often direct drones to loiter a few miles off the Ukrainian coast where they seek out merchant vessels, Senior Lieutenant Alexander, the commander of a patrol boat division, said in an interview. The Russian drones also targeted rescuers after strikes, said the commander, who requested that his last name be withheld in accordance with Ukrainian military protocols. After the missile hit the Golden Leo, Mr. Sebastian suffered first-degree burns. Like many colleagues struck in dangerous seas around the world, he said, he was done sailing. Money is not bigger than life, he said. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Former Catholic bishop is convicted of sexual abuse, Australian news outlets say. A court found Christopher Alan Saunders, the former Bishop of Broome, guilty of sexually abusing 2 men, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation reported, by Laura Chung. An Australian jury on Thursday found a former Catholic bishop guilty of sexually abusing 2 men, according to media reports. The former bishop, Christopher Alan Saunders, 76, was found guilty of 13 sex offenses, including 1 count of sexual penetration without consent and 12 charges of indecent assault, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation reported. He was acquitted of 6 other charges. Mr. Saunders, who was the bishop of the Diocese of Broome, had pleaded not guilty to the charges, local media reported. The current bishop of Broome, Tim Norton, released a statement after the verdict acknowledging the courage of victims, survivors, and other witnesses who came forward to express their truth. We are deeply sorry for the hurt they have experienced. We are sorry for the shame they have endured, Bishop Norton said. The offenses date back to 2008, WA Today, the Australian online publication, said. During the trial, the District Court of Western Australia heard that Mr. Saunders held gatherings where he gave alcohol and food to men, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation reported. The network also said he touched young men with his feet and in one case engaged in oral sex without consent. The victims were young Indigenous men. The Broome Diocese spans the Kimberley region, an area larger than France, in the far north of the state of Western Australia. It has a population of about 50,000, according to the diocese website. Mr. Saunders, who was arrested in 2024, is scheduled to be sentenced on September 1st. The verdict makes Mr. Saunders one of the most senior Catholic clerics in Australia to have been convicted of sexual abuse committed while serving in his post, WA Today said. A national inquiry into child sex abuse in 2017 found that more than 4,000 people had been abused as children in religious institutions, of whom 61.8% said the abuse had occurred in Catholic institutions. Bishop Norton said in his statement on Thursday that he would visit parts of the Broome Diocese in the coming months to speak with members of the community. Mr. Saunders was consecrated as the second bishop of the diocese in 1996, but he stepped aside in 2020, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation reported. He formally resigned from the position in 2021. Hundreds of flights canceled in Sicily as Mount Etna spews volcanic ash. Etna erupts often, but it usually doesn't release this much ash, an expert said. Tens of thousands of travelers' plans have been disrupted in the past week. By Josephine de la Bruyere. One of Sicily's busiest airports has canceled more than 700 flights in the past week because of steady eruptions from Mount Etna, a volcano that has spewed millions of cubic yards of ash through eastern Sicily and its airspace. Etna is one of Europe's most active volcanoes, and its eruptions are frequent, said Salvatore Gambino, the director of the National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology Observatory, which is situated on the mountain. But he said the current spell, which began on August 6th, was unusual because of the sustained and continuous emission of ash. Steady southeast winds have been blowing plumes of ash from one of the volcano's central craters toward the international airport in Catania, a major port city at Etna's base. Since Friday, the airport has closed, reopened, and reclosed its airspace, causing headaches for tens of thousands of travelers at the height of Italy's summer vacation season and just before Ferragosto, a national holiday that falls on Saturday. Sicily's regional government and the Catania Airport Authority have organized train and bus shuttle services for passengers whose flights are diverted to other Sicilian airports, including Palermo and Trapani on the island's western coast. Still, passengers have camped out at Catania's airport and slept on luggage carousels, Italian news media reported. Sicily's government said it had stationed volunteer teams at the airport to hand out water. Catania's airport authority did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Catania's tourism office said it could not estimate how many tourists were stranded. We are sincerely sorry for what is happening these days and for all the potential inconveniences that the situation on Etna is causing, Lucia Caffio, the office's head of tourist promotion and development, wrote in an email. A Sicilian business association estimated that the disruptions could cause $15 to $29 million in lost tourism revenue. Mr. Gambino said it was absolutely impossible to predict how much more ash Etna would spew, or how much longer and where the wind would send it. As of Thursday, the volcano's activity was holding steady, he said. It could end tomorrow, in a few days, in a week, or in a month, he said. And finally today, an unlikely emergency appeal to the Supreme Court from a dog named Bruce. A last-ditch filing this week came on behalf of a dog that a judge found to be vicious and shows how the court's emergency docket has been growing. By Anne E. Marimow. These days, it can seem like everyone thinks their request to the Supreme Court is an emergency. The court has been inundated in recent years with emergency asks from all manner of people and groups who want the justices to short-circuit the lower courts and intervene in their cases immediately. But this week might have seen the first such request on behalf of a dog. His name is Bruce, and he was a 120-pound, 3-year-old Anatolian Shepherd dog who had been detained in Ventura County, California, and ordered to be euthanized after a state court found he was vicious. His crimes included biting 3 people, including a child, and knocking over a man pushing a wheelchair. Bruce's lawyers asked the nation's highest court to step in, and as a Facebook post created by the dog's fans in California begged, "Save Bruce." Applicants do not ask this court to release Bruce, transfer Bruce, place Bruce in the community, or review the merits of the underlying state court dangerous dog determination, his lawyer, Dan C. Bolton, wrote in the Wednesday filing. They ask only that Bruce remain alive in the custody of Ventura County Animal Services while litigation continues, according to the filing. Alas, for Bruce, the request to the court came too late. He was euthanized Wednesday afternoon before the justices had an opportunity to act. But the plea was a reminder of the court's burgeoning fast-track docket, where the justices typically issue temporary orders with little briefing and no oral argument. The emergency docket often includes profoundly weighty questions, including final appeals from death row inmates. Justices from across the ideological spectrum have spoken publicly about how seriously they take the emergency requests and how difficult they find them no matter the outcome. But by granting more fast-track requests, particularly during the Trump administration, they have opened the door wider to all kinds of requests. Justice Elena Kagan recently suggested that the court itself was in part to blame for essentially inviting people, and in this case an animal, to seek emergency relief. Indeed, the court has issued more than 24 emergency orders in response to various requests from the Trump administration since Donald Trump returned to office. Bruce's lawyer acknowledged that a Supreme Court request to save a dog's life was a bit of a long shot. He called the court the last resort. "We're just trying to preserve his life until it's sorted out," Mr. Bolton said in an interview Wednesday before he knew that Bruce had been euthanized. No one disputed Bruce's record of bad behavior. Ventura County posted a lengthy memo about the case, which included graphic photos of the severe injuries from Bruce's bites, including to the bloodied lips of a minor and the mangled arm of a woman, who the county said required surgery and skin grafts. Still, Bruce had won supporters who had urged county officials to spare him, citing county records describing Bruce as a model citizen while housed in the kennel during litigation. According to court filings, Bruce was adopted from the Santa Paula Animal Rescue Center by Claire Bergy, a Ventura County woman, in 2023, and lived with her and her then-spouse for about 10 months without any known issues. But according to the county, Bruce bit a boy on the lips in February 2024, causing severe disfiguring lacerations. Then in the fall of 2025, Bruce wounded a man in the knee, chest, and forearm while tied to a pole outside a CVS pharmacy. A Ventura County Superior Court judge determined this spring that Bruce should be euthanized because his release would create a significant threat to the public health, safety, and welfare. Ms. Bergy then sued in federal court, arguing, among other claims, that Bruce had been taken from her without a fair or due process. Bruce was euthanized on Wednesday, about 45 minutes after his lawyers filed at the Supreme Court. Mr. Bolton said he was appalled that the county had proceeded with euthanasia even after he informed officials early Wednesday that he planned to ask the Supreme Court to intervene, calling it a shameful disrespect for Bruce's life. In a statement, Ventura County Animal Services Director Esteban Rodriguez said there had been no court order preventing the action. Decisions involving the humane euthanasia of an animal are difficult and complex, Mr. Rodriguez said. "We do not take the loss of an animal's life lightly. We have compassion for Bruce and for those who care for him, just as we have compassion for those who were injured." Bruce's tale at the Supreme Court officially came to a close on Thursday when Justice Kagan, who handles emergency filings from the Ninth Circuit, formally denied the request. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Friday, August 14th issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been Chris Wilhelm. Thank you for listening.